Senator Ted Cruz doing an interview with Bloomberg. He's going to talk to Mark Halperin and a little bit Al Hunt as well. They're going to ask him substantive questions about immigration, which he's not going to answer. And they're going to ask him about his Latino heritage. Now, a lot of people are upset about this. Now we're going to get into a discussion of whether these questions were fair or not. But first, I want you to watch them. Let's start.
I know Al knows that a big part of your argument in terms of the party's appeal to Hispanic voters is simply talking about an economic agenda that you think should appeal to them. But let me ask you, it seems to me your last name is Cruz and you're from Texas. Just based on that, should you have appeal to Hispanic voters?
Well, I'll tell you, when I ran for Senate in Texas, I was very proud to receive 40% of the Hispanic vote in Texas.
Now, okay, I think this is a perfectly fair question. Just because you're Latino doesn't mean that you're going to represent Latinos well or in the way that they would like to be represented. So far, I can't imagine that anybody would have an issue with a very fair question like that. Okay, now, remember, I'm not a big fan of Mark Halperin. I think he's oftentimes very mainstream, okay? And it just goes along with conventional wisdom. Here, he's stepping out a little bit to ask slightly risky questions. Let's continue.
Senator, people are really interested in you and your identity, so I just want to ask you as a historical matter, when you filled out your application to Princeton, to Harvard Law School, did you list yourself as an Hispanic?
Oh, sure. I've listed myself as Cuban American. That's my heritage and my background.
Now, given that he's against affirmative action, well, that's a very interesting question to ask. I think it's an important answer to hear. For example, when I applied to colleges, I was against affirmative action, and I refused to fill out that section. So you could have gone in that direction. Apparently, Senator Cruz did not go in that direction. Interesting point to note. Now, but there's two questions about the issue of Latinos, so people are starting to get a little sensitive. Okay, there's going to be some more questions in a little bit. Now let's go to Al Hunt. He's going to ask some about immigration. Now, part of this we sped up because Ted Cruz just wouldn't answer the question. It was blah, blah, blah, blah. It's a fun way that we edited this. Let's watch.
Congressman Stephen King of Iowa has proposed narrowing the 14th Amendment so it would not give automatic citizenship to what he calls anchor babies. Do you support or oppose that sort of legislation?
You know, I think when it comes to immigration, the proper way to go forward is to focus on areas of common ground.
And when it comes to common ground, there are a lot of areas where the American people are in agreement in bipartisan agreement. There is overwhelming bipartisan agreement outside of Washington. We got to get serious about securing the borders. We need to solve illegal immigration. There's overwhelming bipartisan agreement that amnesty is wrong. And there is considerable bipartisan agreement outside of Washington.
That we need to improve and streamline legal immigration, that we need to focus on.
Congressman King's proposal, up or down, Senator?
Look, I understand you want to talk about that, but I'm telling you what I want to talk about. If you want to pass immigration reform, you focus where there's common ground.
Okay, so this is where things start to get contentious because there was a lot of evading the question. Obviously, Al Hunt comes back, but this is all substantive about the actual policies. You can't complain about that. Now, here's the last part that got people all touchy. Let's watch.
I want to close with talk a little bit more about your Cuban heritage and ask you in the following categories whether you have an affinity for or connection to anything part of your Cuban past. You got a favorite Cuban food, Cuban dish?
Oh, I grew up eating Cuban food all the time.
What's your
my
favorite
grandparents,
dish?
Picadillo. And so my grandparents, my abuelo and abuela, they didn't speak English, and my abuela was an incredible cook.
All right, favorite, you like Cuban music? Do you have a favorite Cuban singer?
I have to admit, in that I'm much more of a Texan. I tend to listen to country music more than Cuban music.
All right, finally, we wanted to give you the opportunity to directly welcome your colleague, Senator Sanders, to the race, and I'd like you to do it, if you would, en español.
I'm going to stick to English, but I appreciate the invitation, senor.
Okay. So this is when the alarm bells started going off. Now, some of the response has been funny to this, and I think it's a mixed issue. I'll give you my judgment in a second. Ruben Navarrete, writing at Mercury News, says, I kept waiting for Halperin to ask Cruz to play the conga drums like Desi Arnaz while dancing salsa and sipping cafe con leche, all to prove the Republican is really Cuban. And then people started having fun with it on Twitter with hashtags and such. So somebody writes in, Senator Cruz, please say Lucy for me. We need to be sure. All right, I'm amused. Nice job. Peggy Noonan, another conservative, comes in and says, can you imagine if they did this to other races or ethnicities? She says, Senator Webb, when with your West Virginia Scots-Irish clan, you often fiddle, drink moonshine, and punch outsiders, right? Okay, that's fun. And then another person on Twitter says, Mr. Kennedy, if you're indeed the first Irish Catholic president, chug this bottle of Jameson's and eat a potato. Okay, so everybody had fun with it. The question is, was it egregiously wrong, offensive, un-PC, and all those things? Now, here the jury's a little split. Okay, let's represent both sides. Now, on the one hand, if you had a reporter asking President Obama back in 2008, before he became president, can you really prove to us how black you are? Okay, and that's clearly what Halperin was going for here. Let's be clear about that, right? I mean, the whole "can you say it in Spanish?" that's a trap, right? And he does that on purpose. Now, I don't mind so-called gotcha questions, so that'll be part of the final judgment on this. But in terms of whether he was trying to get them to speak Spanish, knowing that he can't speak Spanish, of course, that's what he was doing. And is the more appropriate way to do that probably by saying, "Hey, Senator Cruz, can you speak Spanish?" Again, I think that's a perfectly fair question. And the answer to that is not fluently. So that would have been the correct way to go about it, probably. Okay, but now if you'd done it when it comes to Senator Obama at the time, and you said, "What's your favorite rapper? What's your favorite soul food?" It doesn't sit too well, right? You got issue in America, so I hear that side of it. On the other hand, is it really a fair comparison? Like, so for example, if I was running for office and people wanted to ask me about I always think about it like, if the shoe was on the other foot, how would I feel about it, right? So I think if they asked me about being a Turkish American, I don't know, I'd find it super reasonable. I wouldn't like, "What's your favorite Turkish food?" "İskender." Can you say hello to Bernie Sanders in Turkish? "Merhaba, Senator Sanders. Nasılsınız ya abi, yapma etme be." Okay, like I wouldn't have an issue with it. I think, like, I get it. I'm a Turkish American. They're asking me about my background. And in this case, he's trying to prod because he's trying to get at whether Ted Cruz really represents Latinos, or they just found a guy who's a Republican with the last name Cruz that he goes out there and goes, "Don't worry about all the things we're doing wrong in the case of Latinos. All the things that Latinos don't agree with us on, it's okay. It's all washed away because my last name is Cruz." I think that is a fair line of questioning. I like that he took some risks with it. And it's a lot better than the standard boring questions we get. But I get why people are concerned. So it's not a no-brainer. It's not a black and white issue, ironically. Okay, so it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Now, what happens? Of course, after the attacks, Mark Halperin's like, backpedal, I got to get out of here. So here comes an apology. We wanted to talk with Senator Cruz about his outreach to Latino voters the day after he spoke at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. My intent was to give the senator a chance to speak further about his heritage and personal connections to the community through some casual questions. I rushed through the questions, and that was a mistake. It led to a poor tone and timing. In no way was I asking Senator Cruz to prove he was an authentic Latino. I apologize to those that were offended and to Senator Cruz. I promise that I will work to make the tone and questions better next time. See, as I read that, I come to my conclusion on this, which is, no, I'm going to pardon him, and there's a big reason why. Now, don't get me wrong, the last part I don't believe. Look, he makes gives a good justification. He was going to speak to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. That's why the questions were about being Hispanic. Good answer, not even an excuse. I think that's probably somewhat correct. But do I believe him when he says he wasn't testing whether he was an authentic Latino? No, I don't believe him. I think he was testing whether he was an authentic Latino. But at the same time, the reason I'm doing the pardon, and I like that I have that power, of course, is that I don't want all the reporters getting gun shy and going back to their stupid, boring questions, okay? Like, I like that he went a little risky. And look, I know that a lot of people say, "Oh, no, Cenk, you're progressive. You wouldn't like it if he did it to a Democrat." It really, really depends on the context, right? So if Hillary Clinton was asked about whether she's adequately female, that would be weird, right? But if she was asked about whether she adequately represents the true feelings of the majority of females in the country, perfectly fair, right? So it all depends on the context. Here, it might have come off a little weird, but overall, I think that it was most of them were fair questions. Finally, Senator Ted Cruz, rare bit of magnanimous response for him. He's not often known for that. He's being known for being caustic. But here in this case, he says, Mark Halperin is a serious and fair-minded journalist. Today, he kindly issued an apology for some silly questions he asked me in an interview. The apology was unnecessary. No offense was taken, nor, I believe, intended, but is certainly appreciated. So, all right, good on Ted Cruz for taking the high road there. Trust me that later he'll refer to that many times as Exhibit A and how he was victimized by the press. Quote me on that.